Turn one soul ring.
So Riley, did you get everything you wanted for Christmas?
Everything.
Yeah.
I got some. Santa brought me some beer
Nice.
and a nice hat
Okay.
and a mug. So yes, and in my stocking I got some Reactin and vitamin B12.
Oh, awesome.
So
Wow.
some toothpaste and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's funny how like that stuff's a lot more exciting than like like toys or something. Even though toys are still exciting, but it's like more exciting to get like
I love
new
getting
Burt's
practical
Bees.
stuff for gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although my brother Colby got me and my brother's Nerf guns.
Oh, that's fun.
Super fun.
Did you guys play with them?
Yeah, we were shooting targets, and then it was funny because all of us were like stressed out about collecting all the bullets and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's like don't lose any.
Yeah, that never changes. All right, everybody. Well, welcome to the show. This is Turn One Soul Ring. I'm Kevin.
I'm Riley.
And I'm Ainsley.
And today on the show, we're concluding our two-part series explaining the events depicted in the Magic the Gathering novel, Prophecy. Last week, we explained the early stages of the war between the Kapamu League and the invading Keldan army. We also introduced the former Kapamu League officer turned Keldan slave, Haddad. He was well on his way to Keld by this point in the story, by sea. And finally, we left off with a resupply of mages and ornithopters from Talaria arriving at Teferi's airfield, and Barrin and Teferi headed to meet them. So there was a whole bunch of other stuff for the war effort, and all brought by Talaria's ambassador, none other than Barron's wife, Rain. So she's making a reappearance here.
She's great.
When Barron saw her, husband and wife embraced, and by the time they were finished, everyone had dispersed. So they were embracing for quite a while.
Oh my god.
Leaving only Teferi staring at them.
Like a creeper.
Well, I mean, they're embracing in public. I don't know if you should be doing that, but anyways. The planeswalker approached them and took Rain's hand in greeting.
I'm happy to see you, Rain.
Teferi said as he let go of her hand and gestured that they should enter the offices.
You should have come to Talaria more often, Teferi.
You know that I prefer to take Urza in small doses if possible.
Teferi replied as they arrived at the strategy room.
Urza's rarely there, Teferi. My wife and I manage Talaria. In fact, this is the longest I've been off the island since we battled the Phyrexian for it.
Just in case anyone was confused, that was Barron.
Really? I thought it was Riley. Oh, man.
It was Riley, yeah.
Oh, okay. Baron and Rain are Gerard's mommy and daddy, right?
Hannah's.
Hannah's mommy and
Yes,
daddy.
Gerard's mother and father are like super side characters. They're dead, too.
Excellent.
So, the three of them discussed and came up with a plan to deal with the Keldans already on Jamurra. Teferi introduced Barron and Rain to Jolrael, also known as the Empress of Beasts in Jamurra.
Sick.
Yep, she's pretty sexy.
Beast mode.
And that's just like a sweet title, too.
Yeah. So they plan to use Jolrael's control over animals for reconnaissance. Rain would also assist her in the task with a group of about 40 artifact creatures brought from Talaria called runners, sort of like a pair of legs that you could ride around on, but they could also just run around themselves, and I think they could communicate with each other, and then also with Rain. I think they don't get into too much detail of them in this book, but I think if I remember correctly, they do get into a lot more detail about like what they are and how they're made in time streams, because I'm pretty sure that's like where they're when they were invented, when like Urza invented them. But anyways, Rain would also she had to be on the ground commanding them with Jolrael. So once they had a clear picture of what they were dealing with, they could better plan where to strike from the air. That process took 3 weeks, and in that time, the two women discovered a small Keldan camp of about 30 warriors and slaves. Jolrael snuck up on the group and overheard that they were heading to a staging area for the next offensive in the war, and naturally, she wanted to capture one and find out more. And that's when something weird happened. As she watched the Keldans and their slaves, they all began to smell an intoxicating odor, It was difficult for her to stay still and not give her position away, but when the Keldons suddenly left their camp and followed the smell, she joined them.
What is that smell?
What she found was the Keldons fervently grabbing, biting, and eating a felled, rotting, and dead tree. The slaves followed shortly thereafter, and they were just as hungry for the tree as their masters.
What?
I'm hungry for a tree.
Give me some of that tree.
I did just actually for Christmas, speaking of getting beer for Christmas, I got some cider for Christmas. And like one is called like something cherry, and one is called, you know, something, some other fruit. Mm-hmm. And one is tree flavored.
No one wants that.
So I'm curious.
What kind of tree?
Rotting, fallen down
is
tree.
It cherry? So in their desire to get at the tree, they used the knives. These are the slaves. They used the knives they'd used to prepare food to stab their masters. The small kitchen knives weren't enough to best the Keldons, though. They still had enough sense to turn from the tree and kill the slaves. But then the Keldon mounts wanted to eat the tree.
You just can't win with these people. Like, our butter knives didn't work. What are we going to do?
Horses, mules, and a horned, hoofed beast native to Keld called a kolos. They were almost twice the size of any horse, and when those things wanted to get at the tree, they used their curled horns to tear apart the other animals and men still feasting.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Just looks like a big mountain goat.
He's cute.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'd ride one.
I'd rather ride one than be torn apart by one.
The Keldons eventually brought the kolos down, but by the time it was over, only a few mules, men, and warriors still lived, and they weren't hungry. But the danger was far from over. Jolrael, still watching, saw something at the edge of the depression where all this took place. A massive form was grasping a horse corpse.
Horse corpse.
Horse corpse. It's a tough one. She put it all together. The lure of the tree, the self-destruction of the Keldon party, the gargantuan beast. This place was a thresher beast trap, and it had caught a full load.
Oh, God. So he just made the tree taste delicious?
Yeah, it's a lure. It's a thresher beast lure.
So do these creatures typically like to eat trees, or he like sprinkled something on it that made it delicious?
He sprinkles something on the tree, waits for the, some fauna or some flora to get interested in the tree. In this case, it was dudes and horses. And then when they're all just crazy about the tree, he comes in and starts eating the people or the horses.
Got me looking so crazy right now.
Yeah, I feel like Keldons are like, I'm not too familiar with Keldon cuisine, but I imagine it's not just random tree in the middle of the field. You know?
No. So a thresher beast was a big tentacled blob-looking thing that lived underground. It would surface for food, and because of its size, it could surface surrounding its victim or victims. So the beast began to pull the dead beneath the ground for later consumption, and while the surviving Keldons were figuring out what to do, Jolrael grabbed some plants from the surrounding area and ran to find the rest of her scouting party. The plants were natural suppressants to the intoxicating substance the thresher beast had left on the tree, and as she ran, she wove the plants into garlands that could be worn around one's neck.
Wow, she's just like running and braiding at the same time. That's really impressive.
She's very talented. She found Rain and the rest of her party and explained the situation to them. She gave them all garlands, and they headed back into the forest to catch a Keldon. When they arrived, another thresher beast had joined the fray, and they turned their attention from the dead to the living. By that point, only half of the 12 survivors still lived. Jolrael's party was only 6 strong. It consisted of herself, Rain, a healer named Shalanda, and three League scouts. In the end, they were able to capture a single Keldon, and the others were killed by the beast, as well as 2 of the League scouts. Shalanda was able to kill the beasts by turning a tiny falling twig into a giant piece of wood that crushed them. She that can heal can also maketh ill.
Sweet.
And after the fight, Jolrael and Shalanda explained to Rain that under normal circumstances, they both should have been able to control the beasts. When they tried, they felt a severance from them as well as from the ground around them, which is why Shalanda had to use a falling twig to magically manipulate. Was the Keldan presence having some effect on the flora and fauna of Jamurra, or was it something more sinister altogether?
That is the question.
Yeah. So, whatever the cause, it was something Rain wanted to investigate further. But anyway, with their Keldan prisoner bound and drugged, they headed for the League base camp, where the prisoner was put into a proper stockade, and the remaining members of the party got a solid night's rest. Save for Jolrael, of course, because she lived in the wild. Although she probably did get a solid night's rest. The next morning saw Rain and Shalanda inside the camp's cramped headquarters. They were there with the camp's commander, a small and fat man named Priggett. He sat behind a large desk, and in front of it sat a small table with all manner of torture devices on it. And there was also a small unlit stove, presumably to aid in the torture. Priggett was planning an interrogation, and just as he explained that to Rain and Shalanda, 4 League soldiers herded the Keldan prisoner into the room and chained him to a chair in front of Priggett's desk. Priggett began to explain to the Keldan that he would have to answer for his crimes against the League and the people of Jamurra, but the Keldan, whose name was revealed to be Kurik, brushed that off and shouted to everyone in the room that his army was massing for a final strike that would crush the League.
You gonna get crushed.
Priggett demanded to be silenced, but as one of the League soldiers raised a club to bludgeon Kurik, he strained against the chains binding him and began shouting some kind of Keldan chant.
This is me?
Is you, yeah. And this is going to be in chunks, so like I'll just pause when it's time for the next one, because there's like kind of 5 of them in quick succession.
All right. The first wind of ascension is Forger, burning away in purity.
Then a burst of flame erupted below Kurik, and his arms and legs separated from the chains holding him. Everyone in the room froze as the massive Keldan warrior studied them. Then, Priggett ordered his soldiers to pacify him. Soldiers hesitated at first, considering their chances against the 7-foot-tall Keldan. Then they attacked en masse. Kurik easily bested the 4 soldiers while continuing his chant.
The second wind of ascension is Reaver, slaying the unworthy.
More soldiers poured into the room, but by that point, Kurik had lifted a fallen soldier's polearm to fight them off, while that's right, continuing his chant.
The third wind of ascension is Eliminator, clearing Keld's path to victory.
Rain screamed that someone should grab a webcaster, a weapon that fired a net against its target. She was also trying to move closer to Priggett, hoping to use his massive desk as cover. Shalanda was closer to the door and struggled to get through the flow of incoming soldiers and find something to subdue the Keldan. Priggett, who'd hoped to glean as much military intelligence from Kurik as possible, finally ordered the soldiers to kill him. And guess what? Kurik thought of that order. Chant.
The fourth wind of ascension is Anointer, defying the worthy.
Then he turned to face Priggett and Rain and threw himself at the massive desk. They both retreated toward the wall behind the desk, leaving himself unprotected to the soldiers behind him. They sunk a whole bunch of spears into his back. Don't worry, though. He finished his chant.
The fifth wind of ascension is Exalter, fulfilling Keld's destiny.
The full force of the Keldan slamming into the heavy desk was visited upon Priggett, crushing him to death. Rain would have suffered the same fate, but just as the Keldan sacrificed his defenses to kill Priggett and Rain, Shalanda had returned with Barrin. He didn't have time to save both of them, so he made the obvious choice and saved his wife by using a spell to pull her out of the path of the desk. The soldiers continued to stab the Keldan in case he got up again. He didn't, though, of course. Face to face with Priggett, he said,
Even a chained Keldan can kill one such as you.
Then he died, smiling at the fat man. And needless to say, they really didn't get a lot of information out of him. Barrin probably could have saved both of them, but he's like, ooh, you know. The war continued, and as it did, it took Barrin to Arsenal City, where he met the Jamurran general Majeda. The first thing Barrin noticed was the man's size. He was larger than many of Keldan's Barrin had seen, although his features were far less severe than the invaders. I gotta say, I remember this card from when I was a kid, and I wasn't sure it was altogether human, and I think his creature type is like Spell Shaper or something, so Certainly doesn't look human. It's got weird hands.
Yeah, it's probably been errated since then.
Yeah. I should have checked. So the general was known as the Lion by his men for his ferocity in battle, but also because he tended to wear skins, animal skins. On top of that, he was also on the front lines and in the heat of battle with his men, which isn't the most strategic place to be for one commanding an army, but that tends to happen a lot in fiction. So after meeting Magetta, he showed off his legion of steel ants, mantises, and crabs. The League didn't contain enough able-bodied Jamurrans and had to be supplemented by a lot of artifact creatures, which we mentioned in the first episode. We really don't need to get into Oh, Evie girl.
She wants to snug in your lap.
So we don't need to get into too much detail about the crabs and mantises because I really don't think it's that interesting. But they're basically just metal versions of their organic counterparts, but like a whole lot bigger. And I think we did mention their size in part 1 of this series. But they were preparing for a fight, and although Barrin didn't want to take an active part in battle, he used his ornithopter to oversee. The League army, made up of mostly metal soldiers, was amassing outside of Arsenal City, waiting for a force of Keldans about 4,000 strong. Barrin was flying above and watched the Keldans approach. Many were on foot, traveling with some cavalry and about 30 land barges. It was also impossible to tell how many of them were slaves, which was always something that they kind of considered when they were in battle, because they didn't want to kill their own people. So, all things considered, Barrin thought it would be a victory for the League. But even with Magetta leading them from the front lines, the League was overwhelmed and was forced to retreat back to Arsenal City, not without the Keldans also taking heavy losses. They also would have followed Magetta and the rest of the League back to Arsenal City if it weren't for Barrin. He wanted to stay out of the fight, but he was so disappointed and pissed off at how easily the League was beaten, he took all that emotion and sent it into the ground. He drove it deeper underground to where the Keldans were pursuing the League forces, then drove it even deeper, causing a sinkhole, and then a landslide beneath the Keldans' feet. So it wasn't the largest hole, but a few land barges and many warriors were swallowed by it, and presumably quite a few slaves. And it wasn't meant to cripple the army, only stop their pursuit. And as Barrin flew toward Arsenal City, he knew he would have to take the same command of ground forces he had for air if the League had any hope of winning the war. Why doesn't he just do that all the time?
Yeah.
Just make a sinkhole under the opposing army.
I mean, if it ain't broke.
It'd be too easy.
Yeah, it would be too easy. By that point in the story, many weeks had passed, and Haddad had finally arrived in Keld. Many more weeks would pass before Haddad was woken from stasis, though. That's what he thought, anyway.
Ooh.
What actually occurred was that Latula had awoken him with the rest of the ship's crew, but she had wiped his mind clean of memories from the previous weeks. During that time, she'd surgically attached a copper ring around his right bicep. Small metal wires protruded from the ring into Haddad's arm, eventually connecting to his nervous system. With the ring attached, Latula could inflict excruciating pain on Haddad with a thought. If she pushed hard enough, she could even kill him. As for the rest of Haddad's missing time, Latula had put him to work rebuilding Lord Druick, remember the Keldan leader who was also an amputee from part 1. After his run-in with the gastro jelly, he was pretty much a torso with a head. So Latula put Haddad to work building new mechanical limbs for Druick, as well as a sort of exoskeleton for the man that he could pilot. These details were something Haddad wouldn't be aware of until later in the story. So the point at which Haddad's post-stasis memories began was when he woke up in a dark bedroom, laying on a bed, fully clothed.
Ooh.
Which means someone had to have dressed him.
He's like, I don't usually wear pants.
It would probably be like really hard to dress someone who's just like kind of dead to the world, like just like dead weight.
Oh yeah, it would be. It would be very hard.
Just like work with me a little bit. So there was a single window in the room, and he opened the curtains to see his first Keldan city. It was really just a cluster of buildings with foot-beaten paths leading to and away from them. There were no streets except a single stone pathway through the city leading to a series of bare hills in the distance. Haddad thought it was eerily quiet and lifeless until he saw a few Keldans and slaves milling about. Not just human slaves either. There were dwarves, elves, and a few other Haddad could only guess at. We've all been there. Having a rudimentary understanding of what lay beyond the bedroom door, Haddad found his shoes, put them on, and opened it. What he found was a Keldan female of middle age. Her name was Iola, and she was the master of Latula's household, while the artificer was away from Keld. Oh yeah, she's also not in Keld currently. She explained that they were in fact in Latula's mansion. Iola then led Haddad to his workshop, housed in a different building. On their way, they passed a cradle house, and Iola explained what it was. We went over that in part 1. Mm-hmm. It's really creepy and awful.
Yep.
Then they arrived at the workshop. Iola took him to the second floor and explained that Haddad was to spend his days rebuilding steel ants from salvaged parts sent from the Jamurran front. Replacing and repairing small systems of the war machines was Haddad's former job as an officer. Rebuilding whole models was out of his league, his Kipamu league, probably. I just thought of that. Not that he said that to Iola. He simply got to work. Because if you don't work, you get beat.
You won't get beat.
Over the following several days, Haddad began to plan his escape once again. And he planned to use his cannibalized steel ant to do it. He would certainly be able to rely on his own creation more than any other slave in Keld. And that was when he remembered a piece of advice 2 nameless men had given him. So you guys have to try and say this at the same time.
Okay, give us like a 3, 2, 1 countdown.
Okay. 3. So on 1, you do it. So 3, 2, 1.
Seek to escape and trust no one.
You know what? I'll just do it in post. It's all good.
You'll do it in post.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
Good advice, though, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, Haddad was working so hard that he dozed off, and when he woke, it was dark outside. That's like every Saturday for me.
No.
You just you can lay on the couch at 11 a.m. for a nap, and boom, Saturday's gone. So he began to gather his things and head back to Latula's house when he heard a rustling from the floor below him. He found a depression in the floor where he could actually see through the first floor of the workshop, and he saw one of the cradle house attendants and a boy that looked to be no more than 8 years old. Haddad overheard that the woman's name was Arissa and the boy was named Greel. Arissa explained to Greel he would be traveling to Jamurra when Latula returned.
I don't know why I need to head south. I'm happy here. There'll be no children for me to play with. Surely Latula needs no watcher over her.
Arissa, great voice, by the way, Riley. Arissa punched the boy so hard that the rings on her fingers tore his flesh. Haddad noticed no blood spilling from the wounds. Then he watched as gashes began to close and the wounds healed.
Whoa. That got heavy pretty quick.
Yeah, right? He just wants kids to play with.
It's time to put your childhood behind you. You will find new playmates among the league and our less fervent supporters. Now, I have a treat for you.
Is it chocolate?
Ooh, treats.
Probably another punch in the face.
She opened her cloak to reveal a sleeping baby in a sling, and Haddad knew something was terribly wrong.
Oh my god.
This is teen fiction right here. Arissa unstrapped the child and laid it down in front of Greel. The boy hopped onto a nearby crate, opened his mouth, and inhaled. His mouth opened wider and wider like a snake swallowing an egg.
Oof.
As he did, it felt like all life and warmth was sucked from the room. Haddad thought he might freeze to death and wondered why Arissa seemed unaffected by Greel's feeding technique. I think it was magic, probably. And just like that, it was over. Greel seemed like a boy once more, although he was larger and his features were more mature, more rugged. The baby, on the other hand, was completely still, and Haddad knew it wasn't sleeping. R.I.P. baby.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So he just sucks the life force from it and gets big. So then Arissa and Greel made their exit. Haddad waited a long time before he found his way back to his room. That'll put hair on your chest, that's for sure.
Uh-huh.
Several days passed, and in that time, Haddad finished constructing a working steel ant. He'd also watched several funeral processions from the window of his workshop. Funerals for babies.
Oh my god.
R.I.P. babies.
I don't like it.
He wasn't sure what Griel was or what kind of dark magic Arissa was practicing, but the boy's growth was plain to see. Soon he would be the size of a warrior. A man.
I'm a real man.
The day Haddad completed the ant was the same day that Latila returned to the city. She was pleased at his progress, so pleased that she performed a gruesome demonstration with the mechanical creature. She displayed her own control over the ant by using it to eviscerate and amputate an unsuspecting dog.
Jesus.
R.I.P. little doggy.
This is rough.
This is a rough.
What is
Might be
happening?
I told you guys this is going to be rough.
I thought you meant like, people would be dying, not babies and puppies.
Oh, characters we love are going to die too.
Oh,
so,
great. This
yeah.
is just the appetizer.
She also displayed her control over Haddad's armband by inflicting crippling pain on the man. It was then that Haddad began to lose all hope of ever escaping Keldon's servitude. R.I.P. hope. So, at the top of the series, we mentioned the Keldons were invading Jamurra for Tufa. What we didn't mention is what Tufa meant to them beyond fueling their war machines. Keldon history basically stated that they once fought and ruled most of Dominaria, and as they did, every Keldon that fell in battle soaked the earth with their blood. The blood stayed in the ground and turned into tufa. I don't think there's actually any scientific background to back that up, because it is probably just a fossil fuel. But so not only was the substance sacred and powerful for the Keldons, for their enemies to use it was sacrilegious. Another detail we didn't mention was that the ruling houses of Keld were split on how exactly to proceed with the invasion. Some wanted to do it the practical way, and some, like Latila, wanted to awaken the witch kings of the past to reinvigorate the old ways. And if you're not familiar with those ways, you should go back and listen to our Bloodline series where we first introduced the Keldons. In that series, we also explained the fall of Gatha, R.I.P. Gatha, and his genetically engineered witch kings. It's actually a pretty good story. I think it's my favorite part of that particular book. So that left a power vacuum in Keld that was filled by the current rulers of the country. And in their struggle to take control, they tried to eradicate any trait of Gatha's influence, meaning that they killed anyone they considered a Gathan, is what they were called. That period was appropriately referred to as the Gathan War. And I don't think Latula and her ilk wanted to awaken decades-long corpses, but I do think they thought they could glean information from the dead witch kings and attempt to recreate them with science. And I think they don't really explain too much about what Griel is, but I think there's probably a connection there, just kind of weird science.
Sure.
Or weird science mixed with magic, whatever.
It's a real Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yeah, he's going to be big. Shortly after Latula's return, she traveled with a sizable Keldon party to the Keldon necropolis. And if you're not familiar with the necropolis, it was basically the former Keldon seat of government, and where many of the former rulers of Keld were entombed, and it was built into a mountain. When they arrived, they were met at the entrance. They were met by the entrance of the council hall, a mighty fortress with walls 30 feet high. Great towers supported the corners of the walls, and the gatehouse sat at the bottom of a steep ramp leading to the central keep. The heart of the fortress jutted directly out of the mountain rock, as if the mountain had half swallowed the building. No one was visible, and the gates were closed. Latula, leading her supporters, stopped, looking for someone to announce her.
I seek an audience with the council.
A small door opened on the side of the mountain, and a woman stepped out. She wore a gray cloak with a hood thrown back, her dress a faded red. An iron-shod staff was in her hands, its half covered in runes. Her face appeared unlined, and only her voice hinted at her age as she spoke. More like her weight, right, Riley?
I, Gorsha, greet you. As a servant to the Witch King Council, I await your reasoning for intruding.
It is time to march, time to take control of our destiny and wake the Witch Kings of old.
Then Latula's supporters began chanting, "Wake the kings, wake the kings." Gorsha raised her staff and brought it down on the stone cobbles. The resulting noise was a scream that silenced Latula's supporters.
Very impressive. But shouts will not wake the kings, or they would have risen long ago. The council finds you unpersuasive and foolish.
Then you shall have proof that I can do what I have promised. Many of the witch kings are shattered in body and must be healed before they can rise. I present Lord Druick to prove that such miracles are possible.
So up to that point in their journey, Druick had been concealed in a kolos-drawn carriage, but at Latula's command, the Keldan emerged to show Gorsha and the rest of them Haddad's handiwork. He was as crippled as ever, but Haddad and Latula had built a suit of armor he could pilot. As Haddad studied the armor, he noticed a round lump on the chest plate. That lump housed the Power Stone, and that's when many of Haddad's memories of building the armor rushed back to him. Anyway, everyone was pretty impressed save for Gorsha, and she let Latula know she wasn't going to let any of them pass.
I will not back down. The kings will rise under my hands.
Latula's demands are rejected. Her mad schemes are to be opposed by all true sons and daughters of Keld. I challenge her now. Win, and the council might hear your plea, but lose, and your cause falls with you. Your supporters will depart, and never again will a crowd cry to wake the kings.
I accept. Let the strongest prevail.
Lady fights. With that, the two women led Latula's party to a wide open space near the necropolis and tested their magical prowess against one another. The two slung all manner of fire spells at each other, and at one point, Latula had the upper hand, but Gorsha was the more skilled mage. She ended the contest by creating a shock wave that surrounded Latula and the Keldan party. It encased them in flame, and Latula was only able to save those closest to her. Even Lord Druick, who had survived the blast, had been left limbless once again. The result of the shockwave left a giant chasm in the earth, and Gorsha kicked what was left of Druick into it.
Jeez.
R.I.P. Druick.
Yeah.
I think I'm limbless once again.
He's just rolling down there, just his little torso.
Oh, rough.
The other Keldans, who were loyal to power above all else, moved to throw Latula into the same hole until Gorsha stopped them.
She has failed. Let her and her servants die and wither in far-off lands. Let her never leave Jamurra as long as I draw breath. The strongest has prevailed, and the witch kings shall not be disturbed again by any in this company.
And just like that, Latula and everything she had was banished to Jamurra to succeed and conquer the continent or fail.
Classic.
Bye, bitch.
So, going back to Jamurra, Barrin was once again in Arsenal City with Magetta. They had just survived one of the largest Keldan offensives during the war. They had not only survived, with the help of Teferi's air force, they had forced the Keldans to retreat. Over the following weeks, the League was successful in pushing the Keldans back to the coast, and Barrin planned to push them further, and once they were expelled from Jamurra, he planned to use Teferi's air force to blow them out of the water. And that's exactly what he did, meaning that Latula and her crew arrived in a far more dangerous environment. They had all been put into stasis shortly after Latula's defeat at Gorsha's hands, then shipped to the Keldan coast. The rest of Latula's house and those loyal to her were also sealed in stasis. Then they were put on a ship and sent to Jamurra. That trip took weeks, and by that point, the Keldan invasion had become a Keldan retreat. Latula was surprised when she and her crew were woken before landfall. The captain of their ship told her it was a safety precaution. The League was bombing ships approaching the coast, so they needed everyone on board awake in case they had to swim. Luckily for them, they docked without incident. Latula was now in control of the Jamurran campaign once again, and she decided she would use that opportunity to build a new Keld, one that was loyal to the Witch Kings. Then maybe, when she was powerful enough, she would return to the necropolis and get him. Who can say? She doesn't really expand on that part of it. That's just my own. Anyway, while Latula was constructing a personal empire, Teferi used magic to force a destructive storm over a Keldan coastal colony, killing thousands, while Barrin and Majetta continued their campaign eastward, chasing the retreating Keldan army. With news of all this, Latula decided to gather her warriors and head west to intercept the retreating Keldans. She planned to rally as many warriors as she could and cause as much damage as she could. The group Barrin and Majetta were pursuing had split in two, so Rain volunteered to go after one half. Alexei was in command of a flotilla of blimps that were also following the retreating Keldans. Barrin ordered her to drop half her bombs onto the Keldans. She reported that the strike destroying 90% of the larger barges and 50% of the smaller ones. Then Barrin sent Alexei's flotilla to intercept the Keldans Rain was after. Barrin also gave Rain a crystal that he would pulse twice when Alexei's flotilla was closing in on the Keldans she was after, and then pulse one single time when Alexei was about to drop the other half of the payload on them. That left Barrin and Majetta to deal with Latula. The Keldan artificer had brought Greel with her, all the way from Keld, and she had dispatched him to connect with the Keldans Rain was after. But they both found each other before the Keldans, and a brutal fight ensued, just as Barrin pulsed the crystal twice.
Ooh, snap.
Yeah. So Rain was piloting a Talarian runner, and when the crystal pulsed once more, the first bombs detonated around them. She was thrown from the runner at high speed and approached the ground. Turning in midair, she came down on her side. Her arm and ribs shattered as they contacted the soil, and her body flipped over and hit once more.
Oof.
Her pelvis and legs broke as she slid to a stop.
Oh.
The pain hit her like a sledgehammer, and she gasped.
Just like, that's it.
My entire body's broken. Ow.
Well, I'm not sure how much pain you'd actually feel in that state. Like, if you've ever broken a bone, it's like not immensely painful right away.
Yeah, like when you broke your collarbone and like took all your...
I took off a pullover sweater.
Yeah.
Like right after. Anyways, so she's laying on the ground. She's facing Greel, and Greel is smiling, his flesh remolding itself after the blast. He advanced on her, and shock enveloped her senses, and she knew she was going to die. She thought of her daughter and the decades she had been with Barrin, so many years of happiness and love.
It was a good life,
she whispered and closed her eyes. Then Greel consumed all that she was, and that's all she wrote for Rain.
Oh.
R.I.P. Rain.
Oof.
Yeah.
That's very sad.
I love you. Yeah, it's even more sad because they're like kind of quasi-immortal, like Rain and Barrin. But anyways, all that being said, the airstrike destroyed most of the other half of the Keldan retreat, which again left Barrin and Majetta to deal with Latula and her ilk. Following the airstrike, Barrin and Majetta's detachment mopped up what was left of the retreating Keldans, and that's when he discovered his wife's body. And she was headless too at this point. He like cut off her head, but they don't go into that detail. That's just how he finds her. As awful as what Barrin went and will have to go through for the rest of his story, I do love his kind of Punisher, the sort of vengeance style Barrin that results from these events. And out loud he said, out loud he said,
"They're dead. They'll all burn."
And that's when Greel piped up.
So is just to get this straight, is Greel like a big boy now? Like he's no longer.
No, do the kid voice.
Is he still a kid? Oh God.
No, I mean in like mind he's still a kid, but yeah, he's like a big scary thing.
Okay. There isn't enough rage and hate in the world to burn me. I killed her, and now I'll get to kill you.
Yeah, I love it. And that's when Greel tried to suck the life from Barrin. But like I said, only vengeance would matter for the wizard going forward. He unleashed a killing wave, destroying Greel and almost everything in its path. It even intercepted Latula and her fleet of land barges, stopping them in their tracks and killing many. Not Latula, though. As Barrin waded through the destruction he'd unleashed, he came upon her. The lower half of the artificer's body had been crushed beneath her overturned land barge, and when she saw him, she thought him a slave.
"Dig me free. Hurry, slave, or I'll have you beaten.
Classic threat. Now, the book doesn't exactly describe what happened after that, but when Majetta and a platoon of Marines found Barrin an hour later, the old wizard was sitting near the barge, and Latula's head had been severed from her broken body. Majetta, so R.I.P. Latula. We can R.I.P. bad guys. Majetta had also found Rain's body, so he didn't need to ask Barrin what had happened. He explained the Keldans were in full retreat and went on to ask,
What should we do now? There are still warriors on plains and small detachments across Jamurra. What are your orders?
Thinking of Rain and the decades of loving memories they shared, his response was chilling.
No quarter, no prisoners.
Yeah, that's good. I like that one. Somebody's just like, nah, let's just kill them all. So I bet you're all wondering what happened to Haddad. Well, he was aboard Latula's barge, but he survived Barrin's attack and was found by Shalanda, who successfully removed his armband. Not without... the results of her removing the armband through magic caused her to fall into a coma that she's still in at the end of the story. So I don't know what's going to happen to her. But anyways, the war was over. Teferi had been successful in obliterating the Keldan colonies along the coast, while Barrin and Majetta took care of the Keldans left inland. And that's pretty much the end of prophecy, except that mysterious severance from the land Jolrael and Shalanda felt earlier in the story. It turns out a plague was spreading across Jamurra, but it was no ordinary plague.
It was a coronavirus.
It was a coronavirus plague. After some investigation, Rain, Shalanda, and Jolrael had deduced that it was mostly organic and likely naturally occurring, but there was a mechanical aspect to it that no one could explain. Something Phyrexian, perhaps. And I really don't know. Like, I'm just, that would be fun. And that's prophecy. And also the completion of the Masquerade cycle of novels. So we did it, guys.
There you go. R.I.P.
Wow.
R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Masquerade cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. R.I.P. also Barrin being a nice guy ever again.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you kill someone's love.
Yeah. So we were planning on moving right on to the invasion cycle with the titular novel Invasion next, but we thought before we get to the part of the story that this has all been leading to, we should go back in time to our villain's earlier years, and I'm of course talking about Yawgmoth and the MTG novel The Thran, which we'll be covering next in our lore series.
Nice.
So we'll get to know Yawgmoth and how he got his powers and became such a douchebag. Turns out he was kind of just born a sociopath, but we'll explain that when we continue our lore series in a few weeks. But other than that, thank you both for your lovely acting skills. All your voices. I'm looking forward to editing this episode. And it always makes me smile. And we'll talk to you people next week.
You people.
Sometimes
Listeners.
you're born with it. Sometimes it's Phyrexian.
That's right. Well, he was very good looking. He could have been on like those Maybelline commercials.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Pictures of him. He's pretty sexy. And that's also how they describe him in the book, especially that feet washing scene that I mentioned to you guys. So I'll elaborate on that more in the future. But yeah, until then, just take it easy out there, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All the best in 2022.
Hey, pandemic's over too.
Oh, yeah.
Right on.
Lol. Yeah, effective December 31st.
Yep.
That's the expiry date.
Yeah, we'll all go home.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.